Next person. You in the hat.
Thank you so much. I have two questions. One about nitrogen in the water on Long Island, and also atrazine in the water on Long Island. So
on your land?
On this island, Long Island.
In the land?
Yes.
Yes.
And I talked to the DEC at a conference the other day, and I said, 20 years ago I saw atrazine in the water table, and it's still there. How come it's not banned?
Right.
He says to me, well, you're taking the tool out of the toolbox. That's what it is.
What?
You're taking his tool out of the toolbox, the guy being the sprayer,
Right.
So I don't understand that, and I was wondering about, the atrazine in the water and what you have to think about it. And nitrogen, too.
Yeah, so the chemicals that are chemical fertilizers, the nitrogen, stuff like that, and the atrazine, all pesticides, I write extensively about water samples that the Geological Survey and various scientists are making across the Midwest and testing, rain coming from clouds and all that stuff. Yeah, we have saturated the earth with really dangerous toxins. Here's a good example. So, Agent Orange is made of two chemicals, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. When you put them together, it makes Agent Orange, both of which are carcinogens in different ways. People are still suffering in Vietnam from the fact that the soil is still contaminated with these chemicals. So 2,4,5-T, for instance, is a chemical that was banned for use in this country, a pesticide. However, we've still been making it in this country. Monsanto was still making it in Nitro, West Virginia. There was a huge settlement just a couple years ago because the town became so contaminated with a chemical which we have banned in our own country, and yet we're shipping to third world countries to use as a pesticide. 2,4-D, we have made now 2,4-D resistant crops because Roundup is no longer working. Atrazine is no longer working. So I don't know what to say to you except that, I spend a lot of my days trying to not go to the mentality that we're just totally fucked, basically. So, yeah, it's everywhere. There was someone back here who wanted to ask, yeah.
Thank you for all your work and your research on this. I'm curious to hear more about your access to these large the agribusiness giants and how you were able to have access to people and how some of your conversations went specifically when you were talking to people at, say, Monsanto and still there.
That's a great question. There's a lot more about that in the book. There's a lot of, there's a lot about that and a lot about the vulnerability I felt as a woman. And I don't want to tell this whole story right now because it would take a while, but there was one moment where I was physically threatened a little bit when I was driving across the Great Plains, or I felt physically threatened. That was scary. But access, I'm an incredible pain in the ass. That's the first thing. So, and I'm lucky enough to have some credentials behind me. I've written for the New York Times. I've written for big magazines. I was brought up to believe that I could, eat dinner with the Queen of England or with the President of the United States or hang with peasants in Mexico. My parents taught me all of that. So it never occurred to me that I shouldn't be able to talk to someone I wanted to talk to. So, what is Zora Neale Hurston says, in Their Eyes Are Watching God, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they sail forever on the horizon. For others, they come in with the tide. Now, for women, the dream is the truth, and then they act and do things accordingly. Now, it's a great quote for these days, right? But I just, why wouldn't these people talk to me? I'm smart, can be charming. I have a couple of good questions, and if they hang up on me, I'm just going to call them back. or I'm going to write about them hanging up on me. So I guess access is how dogged you are, for one. And for two, I think because I had some credentials behind me and because I never occurred to me that they shouldn't talk to me, I just went for it. Now, the people at Monsanto were very difficult. They tried to make it really hard for me. And they tried to, for instance, my book came out and I did an ABC radio tour. Books come out on Tuesdays in general. I did for 2 days of an ABC radio tour where essentially I was in my yoga pants at home on the phone all day long, being patched into different radio stations around the country, mainstream radio stations. And it was really interesting. It was all guys who were talking to me generally. And they were like talking about sports and cars and stuff. And then these were radio stations owned by ABC. And then they would do this interview with me. But every single one of these guys, before they would interview me on the air, they wanted to talk to me either before or afterwards about their own health and their own fears and what they were seeing in the environment. They wanted answers. They were all very vulnerable. And that was so fascinating to me because I thought going into this is going to stink. Like they're going to give me a really hard time. But 2 days after doing those interviews, I disappeared from my publisher is Penguin Random House. And I disappeared completely from the Penguin Random House website, vanished, like gone. It had been hacked and I had disappeared. So, the Monsanto people didn't really want to talk to me. They made it really difficult. And so I would find a workaround. I'd find somebody else who was no longer working for them, but was working at a university, say, or I would just keep calling, or I would find somebody who knew somebody else who could put me in touch with someone. I just dogged, and taking my time. I took my time. Remember, my husband was working several jobs at the time. I was also a mom. There was a lot of time for things to spin and me to figure out what's happening here. And there were even scientists who were fighting the good fight, who sometimes I thought weren't telling me the entire truth about things. And I would realize that. There's a moment in the book where I realized that there's a scientist who hasn't actually told me the full story of what had happened to him. He had been threatened. And then I went back to him to find out more. So, great question. All I can say is just, I kept knocking down doors, and whether I'm dealing with, I've just always been this way. I'm a pain in the ass. And I don't think anyone who I interviewed will tell you any differently. I think they all thought I was a pain. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah.
This thing on? Yes, it is. So can you elaborate how you were physically threatened?
That's a long section of the book, but essentially I was in Nebraska, and a scientist who worked for Monsanto, who I had not portrayed in a positive light in my piece that went viral that I wrote for Elle, intimated that I might be kidnapped. And that was very scary to me. So, but the whole story is in the book. It's just and I don't know if I overreacted. I'm pretty honest about that. I'm honest about everything in the book. It's really like, it's very much a personal memoir, journey, food, travelogue. It's a really fun book to read, actually, even though it's about, GMOs, which by itself could not be a more stultifying topic. Anybody else? Did you have your hand up? No. Okay. No other questions? Comments? Thoughts? Yes.
Do you have suggestions for those listening online where they can join efforts to grow more organic or be more involved in this whole cleaning up our act in terms of pesticides and
Absolutely.
plastics?
So eat organic, easier said than done. Do the best you can. Buy local. have tough conversations with your farmers. Here's an example. Where I live in Maine, I grow food in our garden, sometimes more successfully than at other times. I belong to a CSA. We source most of our food. Like in the book, I really do go through how we made a transformation as a family to sourcing almost all of our food locally and organically. I have recipes in the book and things that I talk about canning and all those different things that we started doing. And what I can tell you is that it's not always easy. So where I live, we have lots of farmers markets, lots of access to farmers. There's a farmer whose cheese I really like. We actually buy their organic eggs, but they don't feed their cows organic feed. They feed them non-GMO feed. I really want to eat their cheese. Their blue cheese is so good. It's the best blue cheese around, but we don't buy it because what I know about pesticides going into the fats. But I had a very frank conversation with them and told them why I wouldn't be buying it. And every so often I ask them if they've transitioned their cows yet to organic feed. And they tell me the reasons they haven't, and it's always awkward. And then we still don't buy the blue cheese. Is it fun to do that about everything? Is it fun to be an investigative reporter about your food, your shampoo, your personal hygiene products? It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work, and sometimes we all fall flat on our faces. But we do the best we can. We do the best we can. And really, honestly, someone said this last night. We can't actually solve any of these problems until we solve the climate issue. Unfortunately, the climate issue is tied to a lot of these other problems, right? But so if we get rid of one thing, we may actually start to solve the climate issue. But it has to be a coalesced, intense effort to ban pesticides, to change this intensive agriculture, to let some of the prairie go back to being prairie in this country. To reclaim jungle for the animals and the trees and the insects and everything. So we don't need all this. What's really fascinating when I was researching this book, one of the things that just shocked me was that since the advent of the GMO, actually the number of food insecure people on the planet has gone up. So the two promises: we're going to use less pesticides, and we're going to feed more people. Well, both of those have failed. We're using far more pesticides, and the number of food insecure people has risen steadily on the same chart as the GMO has been used with its use going up. This has to be stopped, and we will also start to address the climate issue in that way. But it's a chicken or egg kind of thing. Right now, we have to deal with the climate, and we have to deal with how we are polluting the planet at the same time as we do that. Anybody else? I think I have a few more minutes. Yeah. I filter our water. We filter our water. What? Well, it depends on the filter you have. I use something called the Berkey, Berkey, which is a big stainless steel thing that sits on your counter. My mother actually bought it for me when I was living in Los Angeles, and which has some of the worst water in the country as far as pesticides and other pollutants in the water. And it's a big stainless steel thing that sits on your counter, and you pour your water in, and it has carbon filters. Water is a really big issue. But supposedly a lot of pesticides do get filtered out from carbon. Actually, water is really fascinating, and that was what I was going to write about next, but decided that I just didn't want to be out there in the field. My youngest son was 2 when this book came out, and I just didn't want to do another big topic, which is why I went to a novel that I've been carrying the idea around since 1998, believe it or not. But water is a huge topic. It's how to filter it, the plastics involved with filtering systems, the different stuff involved in softening water, big industrial filtering systems for cities, lakes and ponds that water comes from. It's really fascinating fascinating and terrifying once you start to try to look at solutions and look for solutions for how are we going to keep water clean and how are we going to have enough water for the whole planet.
Thank you.
I saw somebody else's hand. Yeah.
Is it accurate that organic refers to the growing process and that they put pesticides on the produce after it's harvested to protect it from insects and such en route while it's being transported?
Uh-huh.
Is that accurate? Is that true?
Well, I mean, probably. I mean, so a lot of food gets all kinds of different stuff on it. They get waxes, they get a food grade wax or a sort of oil or a gel sometimes put on them. I'm assuming there are pesticides, at least in the trucks, for sure. The trucks are sprayed down, I'm sure. I don't know about organic. I think there are specific rules for organic. But that's a great question. I don't know that much about spraying down produce post-pick, but I've always assumed that there have got to be pesticides in the trucks and stuff to make sure that they don't get contaminated with bugs. Yeah.
What is the best way to wash them off?
You can't wash off most pesticides.
Even veggie wash and all these kind of things?
No. It's so a lot of these things are systemic and they are taken into the flesh, as water.
Into the flesh of the plants.
The flesh of the plants, yeah. So most pesticides are systemic. Neonicotinoids are a systemic. It's a neurotoxin. And it's systemic. And that's one of the ones that's affecting the bees. Glyphosate, Roundup, is a systemic pesticide also taken in by the plant, by its roots, and funneled up through the hole into the fruit and the stalk and the leaves and everything. And then that's why, so when the plant sweats a little bit and there's a little bit of what they call these guttation drops, and that's what the bees drink in the morning, that's their water, that's why that's one way that they come in contact with pesticides. Anybody else? No? Are we done? Terrific. If you'd like to buy a book, I'd be happy to sign them. Thanks.